As we mentioned previously, it is possible to create whatever elements, whatever attributes it is that we might want. Well, how do we go about checking to see whether or not a document is using the elements and attributes that we expect? This is where validation comes into play, which is going to utilize an XML schema. Now, the first thing that I want to mention about validation is that validation does require that the document be well-formed. That's always a requirement. However, validation is optional, and validation just simply means that my document abides by the rules laid out in an XML schema. A schema, as it turns out, is just simply an XML document that defines how other XML documents are supposed to work. Our XML schema, XML document to define how other documents are supposed to look, is going to identify all the elements, all the attributes, acceptable values, and how the document needs to be structured. Now, as I mentioned again, validation is optional. What's nice about validation is that it will allow an application to detect any problems in the XML before we start going through it. However, it is going to slow things down. Now, putting together a full schema is beyond the scope of the course, but what I do want to highlight is that if you are looking for more information, you can check out the W3's website, and they've got a fantastic set of examples and write-ups and primers and so forth, starting at the URL that you see on the screen. The last surrounding technology that we want to take a peek at is what's known as a namespace. A namespace identifies a collection of XML elements and attributes. Basically, what it's there for is it's there to signal to the application that's going to be using this XML document what tags to expect. Now, namespaces are optional. You'll notice we created a document a second ago and we didn't put in any namespaces. And you'll notice that a namespace is going to be identified typically by a URL string. However, and this is the one part that usually throws people, namespaces need to be pre-programmed, hard-coded into the application. So even though it's a URL, the URL does not have to point to anything, and there is actually no mechanism for an application to follow that URL and figure out what XML to expect and how to use it. So there's no requirement that the URL be valid. It's only there for uniqueness. Now, if we wanted to maybe get a little bit fancier with our document, maybe we were going to be passing it into a system that was going to know about what a namespace is, we could go ahead and add one in. You'll notice the syntax here for adding in our namespaces. The namespace must be declared, and on the slide here, I've got the sample namespace for an XML schema. You'll notice again that it is a URL, but again, that's just arbitrary. It doesn't have to be a URL. Now, we may have a complex XML document that's going to be using a lot of different sets of elements and attributes, and we may decide that we want to use different ones, different namespaces. Well, if we're going to be using different namespaces, one of the things that we may want to do is identify which namespace we're using by utilizing a prefix. If we want to use a prefix, you'll notice the syntax slightly changes. That what we're going to do is we're going to say XMLNS again, but we're going to put in a colon and then our prefix. And then every time that we want to indicate that a tag, for example, in this case, schema, is part of that namespace, we need to put in that prefix. So you'll notice the prefix of XS colon. Let's take a real quick look at this. So I'm going to go back to my little example over here, and let's say that we just wanted to identify a namespace. So what I would do is I would say XMLNS equals, and you'll notice that the development tools has a series of built-in namespaces that it recognizes. As a result, the IntelliSense is automatically going to pop up and show me what that list is. Now, if I was going to create my own, it might look a little bit like this. http:// and let's say www.trainsignal.com schemas, and let's just say demo order. Now, for my little sample here, putting in the namespace is honestly not going to make a difference. But if I was creating an application that was going to be using this, this would be a way for me to indicate to that application the elements and attributes that that application could now expect. There's the basics of XML. In other lessons, we'll be taking a look at how we can actually utilize XML inside of SQL. So I'll see you in those later lessons.